There we go. Oh, and let's get rid of that stuff. You're all set.
Okay. Again, welcome. We're going to talk tonight, or I'm going to talk a little bit about women in the military. I'm going to take you back in time a little bit. We're going to focus mainly between 2003 and 2005. There'll be a little bit before and after that. I want to basically explain to you how the role of women in the military has changed, and then we'll get specifically into nursing as well for part of that. We're going to be traveling to places like, let's see, Al Udeid in Qatar, and then we'll go into Iraq and then even over to Africa. And I've got some good pictures. Nothing is gory, nothing will get people upset, hopefully. My name is Dianna Clark. I'm a retired lieutenant colonel from the reserves in the US Air Force. And the way we look at things these days is we are soldiers, we are women, and we are veterans, sometimes invisible veterans. And this is not advancing.
Let's see, give it just one.
Technical difficulties.
You just did this.
Yes, I did a few times. And enter a few times. We didn't do that. If we do it down here.
Okay, we had this working.
Yes, we did.
That's what they all say.
I know.
I know.
Is it a PowerPoint or?
Yeah,
Yeah, it should just go over with the.
it was working before.
Let's try one more time.
There we go.
I don't know why that.
Thank you. You may be up here for every slide. I don't know. Hopefully not. What you see embedded in the flag there is the oath that people take, the oath of office when they go into the military. When you hear people say they've joined the military for a specific cause or a specific reason, what they're actually taking an oath to is to defend the Constitution of the United States, not a specific cause. They have to obey the orders of the President of the United States, whoever that is at the time. So if you're in for the long haul, as I was for 24 years, you're going through several administrations. So to say you're going in to fight terrorism, okay, fine, that went on for 20 years. Not to say that that's where you're going to wind up. I had a friend of mine who was a Massachusetts state trooper who wanted to join the Navy and be in Vietnam. He wound up in Bermuda, good for him, but he was devastated because that's not where he wanted to be, and that was not why he joined. So he got out shortly after that. But this is what you are doing, and this is what you are obligated to do. Myths about women who serve in the military. I moved up to this area about 2008, and I was listening to a radio show, and it was sometime after that. It was a radio show out of Albany. It was well known. There was a panel discussion, and there was a gentleman on who made the following statements. Reservists and National Guard are only used as backfill, and they're only kept in the United States. Women are never sent to dangerous places. Nurses don't carry weapons, and all nurses are covered under the Geneva Conventions, and that's not a spelling error, as non-combatants. When we talk about backfill, I know the Navy back in the 80s did do backfill if you were a reservist. You were basically kept in the United States and the active duty people went forward. That is not true in the Air Force, and it is not true in the Army. We were some of the first in 2003 over active duty. Dangerous places, we'll get into the rest of this as we proceed. A little bit of history. In the Revolutionary War, we don't have a lot of documentation, but we know women did serve alongside of their husbands, their brothers, their fathers. They were in supportive roles. They did the cooking, the laundry, they provided medical care. If soldiers fell, they would oftentimes take up their weapons and continue the fight. In the Civil War, I found this interesting, an estimated 400 women total, some from both sides, actually disguised themselves as men so they could fight. And several of them were wounded and denied medical care because they were afraid their gender would be discovered and they couldn't continue with what they were doing, which is pretty dramatic. Some statistics about World War I. The involvement of women in World War I helped to get us the right to vote with the passing of the 19th Amendment. In World War II, several women served in various capacities. As we proceed with this, we're going to see that there aren't as many statistics. Women at this point, for the majority, do not want to be seen separate. We want to be seen as soldiers. We don't want to be a separate group, because that has been a problem. When I first saw this slide, this really got to me. This says it all. This is a nurse from Vietnam. It describes everything, the exhaustion, the grief, everything that you go through is expressed in this woman's face. Things that people do not necessarily know about the Korean War. Army nurses were the only military women in the combat theater, and there was an involuntary recall of reserve nurses. In Vietnam, there are statistics listed here as to how many served, and 90% were nurses, and the other fields that they served in. This was, I think, one of the last places where I could find specifically about how many women died. When we get into Iraq, what I had to do was, I couldn't find the figures. I had to go in. They don't list the wounded. They list the number of wounded, but they don't distinguish, as they should not distinguish. You can find the people that were killed. I actually had to go and look at the photographs to figure out how many women, because even the names didn't work, because people had names like Chris, so on and so forth, and you really couldn't tell. I'd like to talk a little bit about the educational levels for registered nurses. People may have associate degrees, but you can't get in as a commissioned officer anymore with an associate degree. That stopped somewhere in the early to mid 90s. 100% of registered nurses in the military have a minimum of a BSN. 65% only have a BSN, 25% have master's degrees, 10% have PhDs. On the civilian side, 45% are working with associate degrees, 55% have gone on for their BSN, only 17% have a master's degree, and 1.9 PhDs. I'll tell you how I got these statistics. Civilian nurses, those numbers are based on information that came out in 2020 from the American Nurses Association. The military, these are approximate, but within 2 or 3 percentages. They had them broken down by service. They had them broken down by reserves, by guard. They were all roughly the same. And the 100% to get in is required across the board. Women soldiers, we are taught and trained to lead. Civilian nurses manage. We lead. There's a big difference. We are soldiers first. Career field comes second, and then you're a woman. That's how that works, and that's how we like to be seen. And oh, there it is. When I first went in, I went into the Army and later transferred over to the Air Force. In the Army, my commander, Colonel Charles Umhigh, described the scene. He was a MASH surgeon. One of the first things he told me was, he said, when I was in Vietnam and they sent in my first group of nurses, he said they came in just as you see here. If you'll notice the males in a combat zone, they have their fatigues, they have their weapon, they have their boots. If you look to the nurses, we have our pocketbooks, we have our skirts, we have our stockings, and we have our high heels. Those women were at a tremendous disadvantage. But they stepped up to the challenge, did what they had to do, and did an amazing job. A little further in, this is what it transitioned to, and I love the sign. When I was in the Army, I was not in Vietnam, but I was in an evacuation hospital, so I definitely relate to this. This young woman wears this uniform very well. It is a man's uniform, but she does good with it. This is Jessica Lynch. She was, at this point, 18 years old. She had joined in August of 2001. She was 5'3", she weighed 100 pounds. She has a book that she wrote, and she describes all the challenges. And I loved reading her book because I looked at that and I thought I was alone in the things I was seeing and I was experiencing and feeling, but many women go through the same thing. I have this slide here specifically just to show the uniform. The hat is way too big, it comes down to the ears. That t-shirt, I guarantee you, comes down to mid-thigh. And if you look where the shoulders of the uniform are, they're roughly here. There were no women's uniforms. Not at that, and this was 2001, and she was active duty. So it was a challenge. It gets more challenging as you go on. There are differences from service to service. I was shocked when I went from the Army to the Air Force with the jewelry, with the this, that, and it was like, oh, this is just so different from me. But they have different rules and regulations. Based on your location, things can change dramatically too. When I was deployed to Al Udeid in Qatar, it was, or Qatar, 130 degrees. It was very, very hot. We wore obviously our flight suits, which were specially designed for that kind of weather. That's what we wore on our missions. But anytime we were not on a mission, we were told they were designing a uniform. We didn't have it at the time. So it was man shorts and man t-shirts, because that's all we had access to. But there was this ridiculous rule about if you were an Al Udeid, you could not have pockets in your shorts. I have no idea why. Then when I went to Africa, which Al Udeid was cooling down, we got down to 90 degrees, and then I went to Africa, it was 105. So we're back to the shorts and t-shirts, but you had to have pockets. I have no idea what that was about. And you would get written up. And I had a friend of mine who had served early on in Balad in Iraq, and she was the first sergeant there. And I remember her emailing me going, this is so ridiculous. She goes, we're getting bombed 9 times a day. They were a medical center for down there, or a miracle center, as I call them. And she said, they have me running around yelling at people because they have pockets in their shorts. She goes, this is ridiculous. Many regulations about hair and nails and lipstick. And when I first went in, there was a whole big thing about tattoos. If you had them, they had to be covered. As of October 2022, women in the Air Force can have tattoos on their face. I don't know. The hair stuff got really the hair stuff got really stupid for women, especially in the Air Force. You could wear these big clips, but you couldn't wear bobby pins. It was just kind of strange. Then when you get to undergarments, it gets even better. New regulations coming out in October of 2022 tells you when and where you can wear stockings under your uniform, when and where you can wear socks under your uniform. I really don't need people to tell me that. Another, please ignore the ears on my helmet. This was some kind of, we had just come off some mission. This was a special deal. I don't remember what it was. A few points with this slide. I'd like to point out the flight suits. Flight suits are made for men, have always been made for men. And women have been flying and pilots in one aspect or another since the 40s. I was in the Air Force from 95 to the beginning of 2012. 3 changes in the flight suits, not one of them took women into consideration. If you'll know, I'll point out the difficulties to you. That little tab is just a little flashlight we add. The zippers come down from the top, they come up from the bottom. So when you have to use the facilities, the whole uniform has to pretty much come off, which is interesting on an airplane, but that's a whole nother story. There are pockets in the front, as you can see. If you have any kind of a chest, you are not using those pockets. And it's just an uncomfortable feeling that you get used to, but why they didn't design them for women, I have no idea. The other thing about this slide is I was the medical crew director, which I'll explain a little more. This young woman, Staff Sergeant Susan Case, was one of my flight nurses. This gentleman, the gentleman on the left is a critical care flight doctor. The gentleman in the middle there is a respiratory therapist, and the gentleman to the right with the glasses is a critical care nurse. At this point in time, we had only been in Iraq about a year and a half, maybe, and they decided that a lot of these missions had increased in critical care capabilities. I was one of only 3 people on flights that had multiple patients, some of whom were on ventilators. They carefully looked at their personnel and saw what their backgrounds were, and they were very careful about what they did. So I got missions other people may not have had. This was a critical care team. What they were is these people were plucked out of a hospital and put on a battlefield and on an airplane. I was over the physician. I oversaw the team because they were not trained in flight physiology. They were unfamiliar with the aircraft that they were flying on. They knew their patient care really well, but it was a different environment for them. So the medical crew director had to oversee them. I was responsible for them on and off the plane, and I was responsible for my own crew, and I was responsible for my patients.
Go ahead.
Oh, can we do questions at the end? Is that okay?
Yeah.
You don't forget now. Okay, a medical crew director is a registered nurse who is an officer who has a secret security clearance. We won't go into why that is, but we get into a lot of other things besides nursing. We have to attend the School of Aerospace Medicine, which includes flight physiology. We go through an altitude chamber with fighter pilots. They usually do a lot worse than we do because it's an ego thing for them. And you can't survive an altitude chamber if you have an ego. We do what's called a universal qualification. We train on a variety of aircraft, usually 3 main frames. We as nurses have to know electrical systems, oxygen systems, how to configure an aircraft. We have to read technical orders. Back then they were in paper, over 1,000 pages, no index, no glossary. However, when I found myself in a position when I was on an airframe that I had never seen before, and I had a critical care patient with no doc, no critical care team, all that training just came right into place. And it went well. I left that soldier, that one of them, well, they were all left better than they were found, which was what I wanted to do. Like the pilots and everyone that works on the front end crew, we do multiple day annual check rides. Actually, you come into phase, it's between 12 and 17, every 12 and 17 months in that area. We go to survival school. We go to land and water survival school. POW training is something that got added after Jessica Lynch and Shoshana Johnson were taken prisoner of war. They decided, the front end, it was interesting, the females that flew the plane and were flight engineers and navigators, they went through POW training, but the nurses didn't. There was this disconnect. And going back to the original myths, it was, oh, well, you're covered under the Geneva Convention. Okay, really? And it turns out we were not when they looked at it. You have to pass an annual class 2 flight physical. The only people that take flight 1 or class 1 are fighter pilots. We had to meet the same standard as the pilots did. We must pass our physical training. That's just a military thing, twice a year, push-ups, sit-ups, run. Qualifying on the weapons range, we have to do a live fire twice a year. If we're deploying outside of that range, we have to do it again. When I first joined and went into the Air Force, we were doing this computer game thing. Nurses don't need that. They don't need to know how to use weapons. And that quickly changed again in 2003. And that did a rapid turnabout. These days, there are very few nurses who are actually at the bedside. Most are deployed throughout the world, peacetime and during conflict. We serve on ships, helicopters, cargo planes, refueler aircraft, tents. During the height of COVID pandemic in New York City, nurses were brought in, they set up tents, they did all kinds of things. The USNS Comfort was brought to New York City as well, manned by Navy nurses. Flight nurses also oversee when we're in a conflict or a war zone. We transport enemy POWs. People didn't know that. I mentioned that to a friend of mine who was in the military and said, I never knew that. Flight nurses are commanders, they're generals, they're admirals. They serve at the Pentagon. In 2003, reserve flight nurses, they served as part of liaison teams, and they were embedded with combat troops going into Iraq for the first time. And I know this because 4 of those teams came from my reserve unit. There were men and women, and you went through special training. I was on the team for a while. I spoke to my commander. She's the one who sent them out, female. She went through Desert Storm. She had been in for a lot of years. And I asked her recently, I said, when you made these decisions and you were embedding people with 3rd Infantry, with airborne troops, so on and so forth, did you look at what teams had women, what teams had men, blah, blah? She goes, no, why would I do that? Good for her. I also met up with some of these people recently who had actually done these jobs. It didn't dawn on me at the time what that entailed, that they were first in with these troops and the troops didn't know what to make of them either. It's like, women, nurses, what are they doing with us? But some of the experiences were really amazing and some of them were absolutely hilarious. The other thing, when people get deployed overseas, if things are relatively quiet and relatively safe at times, we will do things in our off time. We will go into the community and help in the community on our own time. And when I was in Africa, the teams before me would go and work at orphanages. They would work in animal reserves, preserves, whichever. When I arrived, things were too hot and heavy and the base was put on lockdown. So I was not allowed to do any of those things. This is a slide I didn't know I had, or a picture I did not know I had. I got it at Arlington Cemetery at the Women's Memorial, Military Women's Memorial. And I highly recommend if you ever go back there or are there, you really need to see this memorial. I'm sorry?
You have a picture
Of the memorial?
Is there supposed to be a picture?
No, there isn't,
Oh,
but thank you. No, just what it says.
oh, okay, sorry.
The two paragraphs are very interesting. The first one is the military's take on things, and they thought they were being very good to women. And the second part is basically the reality of what happened as a result of this. I would like to read it if you don't mind. I don't like reading to people, but this is an exception. As of 2005, over 80% of all jobs and more than 90% of all military career fields are open to women. In the early 1990s, following Desert Storm, laws prohibiting women from serving aboard combat ships and combat aircraft were repealed. Policy, however, continues to restrict women from serving in the infantry, armor, artillery, and special forces, aboard submarines and in units whose primary mission is to engage the enemy in direct combat. Here's the reality. On the unconventional battlefield of the war on terror, many men and women regularly are exposed to combat, taking and returning enemy fire, and meeting the challenges of direct combat, regardless of job or unit of assignment. That was a big disconnect. Now, if you have to dress like this, I think there's a problem. These were not combat women, but this is what you ran into. And this book, Band of Sisters, was given to me by Phyllis Fries from our veterans group. And it's a very good book. And it talks about different women and the challenges they faced, which were kind of extraordinary. Not combat troops. Helicopter, not a combat helicopter, shot down. She was faced with the enemy down the road. She had to be in a certain place for rescue. She turns around, there's a 15-year-old boy. In an instant, she has to decide, do I kill this innocent 15-year-old boy? Because people are going to come after me if I don't. And if I move, they're not going to rescue me, blah, blah, blah. She let the boy go and she moved and she was rescued successfully. But we should not be put in these situations. We are not combat soldiers, or not trained to that level and to respond to those types of situations. But we do and did. And this is in the blink of an eye. The USS Cole, there were 17 dead, 2 of them were women, 37, that number kind of fluctuates a bit. I was part of this recovery, actually. I was stationed in Germany as a duty officer, and we didn't have an Africa command, and this happened off the coast of Africa, so we were responsible for getting these people back. We got a call when we were in Ramstein, they're coming back, they're coming back. So we went out to the aircraft, they opened the back of the aircraft, and there were 17 flag draped coffins we did not expect to see. We thought we were going to offload the wounded. That was devastating, more so for the people than it was for us, but still. Nasiriyah, Iraq, this is the Jessica Lynch story. Less than 3 days into the war, 9 KIA, to include one woman, 2 other women were severely wounded. One was shot in both ankles, and the other one, Jessica Lynch, had all kinds of injuries. None of these women were combat soldiers or sailors. They were just doing their job in a non-combat soldiers. Mosul, Iraq, was another place. I was over there when this occurred. I had just left Mosul and came back from a mission. We would go there once or twice a week. They were young, energetic people. You knew them by sight. You knew them by their first names. This was devastating, and I'll get to a slide later. I'm not going to speak to that slide. I will just let you read it. There were a few other things that went along with that. So let's go on the tour. Iraq is in the middle, as you can see. Nasiriyah with the Jessica Lynch story is down at the bottom. Then we come up, when I got there, Baghdad was already pretty secure. Next to it, Fallujah, not at all secure. It was the height of the Battle of Fallujah. And Mosul up at the top was crazy. Also not very well controlled. I have flown to every one of these places. There aren't any real airfields there except for Baghdad. So when we came in, it was 130s and C-17s, which could land on dirt runways or makeshift runways. And we were going into field hospitals basically and evacuating them back. We would take them out to a place called Balad, which isn't even on here. And if it was bad enough and we were on a C-17 or we would do a tail swap, we would go right into Germany with them. Okay, specialist. I'm going to call her Lori Pye because that's what she liked to be called. This is the Jessica Lynch story. This is a story that has not been told and needs to be told and is getting buried in history because it was a failed military operation. So we kind of want to not talk about it a lot. This woman is a hero. She was killed in action March 23rd. She was a single mother. She has children ages 3 and 6. This is the part that her write-up, this phrase is I've never seen before and hopefully we'll never see again. First woman, Native American, to be killed in combat on non-American soil. She was a member of the Hopi tribe. She lived on Navajo Reservation in Arizona. She did not have to go to Iraq. She was a roommate with Jessica Lynch. They could not be more opposite as far as culture, religion, so on and so forth, but they bonded. So when Jessica was deployed overseas, she had, Lori had a shoulder injury and she did not have to go. And she asked to go. She said, I want to go anyway. Because she's my best friend. I need to be with her. And off they went. And this woman, it's a whole nother story, but she put people in a vehicle. Everything went wrong that could go wrong. Vehicles broke down. They took wrong turns. They wound up in the middle of enemy territory. She had picked up people along the way who were being left, put them in her Humvee as they drove into this middle of this town surrounded by people with grenade launchers. They launched one at them. The vehicle blew up and got pushed into the vehicle in front of them. She was still alive. When all was said and done, she got hauled off. She had a closed head injury. She wasn't responding and she died a short time thereafter. The other 2 survived. I'll get into them in a minute. Jessica Lynch is on the left. So Shauna Johnson was, I don't think, with the other 2. Her story is not all that clear to me. She has written a book and she got shot in both ankles. Her book is I'm Still Standing. And I think most of her, what she shares with other people is her post-captivity experience. Jessica Lynch's book starts when she was a little girl and goes through to and after her being rescued. Okay, now if you look down towards the bottom, you see Qatar. That's where I was technically based. That's where my paperwork was. And that's where I slept occasionally, and I occasionally did laundry. All of my missions were in Iraq, and I spent more time physically in Iraq and Djibouti, which you see up there, which is in Africa, than I did in Qatar. I'll explain a little about that. I was part of the 379th Air Expeditionary Wing. What you see here is just wonderful. There was no color. It was 130 degrees, no clouds in the sky. And this was holidays as well. It looked like this. When you are in a foreign land, you have to, when in Rome, do as Romans do. You're in someone else's land. You contract for the space and for this base. You need to observe their cultures and their traditions. And we honor that as to the best we can. And we sign agreements, we will and won't do certain things. We were not allowed to have religious articles. We were not allowed to have religious articles sent to us. We were basically not allowed to celebrate Christmas. What they did was they gave each unit a big piece of plywood and you could decorate it and they put it along a road and they were very well done. But there were certain themes they could not have. But this was Christmas for us. So also, prior to deploying us, we go through formal classes. This is the culture. This is the, this is education that we learn about the country. And sometimes we even learn a little bit of the language. Okay, I'll let you read this slide. And again, we couldn't have Christmas trees. So the story about this is this woman was a major. She responded to the bombing. Fortunately, I had just come back in, so I was not up to go out. They were the people that responded to this were a bit devastated, needless to say. We are 5 days, when this occurred, 5 days before Christmas. These people were, some of them were not only not going to be home for Christmas, they were never going to come home again. Those that survived this would never be the same again. We knew these people. We worked with these people. We couldn't have Christmas. And this may seem irrational, but this major said, okay, get me this, get me that, get me the other thing. A bucket, mop, duct tape. We took all our clothes off our wire hangers. We made branches. We found what little decoration we had and put them on. She even had a little bit of light there that she put on, nowhere to plug it in. We couldn't have this. So someone called that wing commander, he called the MPs, and didn't they come over and tell us we had to tear it down? We were irrational at the time, I have to tell you, and all the women were standing out there and they said, we're not, you've got to go through us to get this tree down, this stupid little tree down. And the Marines came out behind us and they just stood there and they said, you know what these women have been through? He said, leave them alone. So they said, okay, but take the lights off the tree. And we were like, we can't plug them in anyway. And we had our Christmas tree for Christmas. So when we light our Christmas tree in the park, and John DeFries talks about that represents soldiers who are not home for Christmas, this is what I think about. And I love the little trees we put up this year. I think that was a great idea. Okay, now we're going to travel to Africa. Had no idea I was going to be there. And Isabel, this is the one I was talking about. If you see way in the back, there is a wall. I was in the last row of tents, second tent in. So I was right by that wall. So that was a very scary place to be, because if you look at the map, we have Ethiopia, we have Somalia, and we're right across from Yemen. That was not a friendly place to be. This was basically an anti-terrorist task force that I was supporting. It was like being in a James Bond movie. So one night I come out of my tent, and again, you need to dress, because when you walk out of your tent, you don't know where you're going to wind up. So the portisan that we had to use was all the way across on the other side where those men are. I came out of my tent and there was an Abrams tank, one of ours, and a whole lot of men with a whole lot of big weapons. Someone they thought had breached the wall. Now I'm right there back against the wall. So I go, they said, you can't come out now. I said, okay, fine. So I go back in my tent and I had a perfectly good night's sleep because I was surrounded by special forces in the United States Marines. I felt fine. And if you'll notice the sandbags, they're at a specific height. Your cot is right there. So if anyone fires while you're asleep in your cot, hopefully you survive. That road turns to mud in the rainy season, and I was there for that. And you have to walk 1/4 mile to get to a shower. So that was fun. So here we are still in Africa, and I went on a helicopter. This was a woman, Marine pilot, her first air-to-air refueling from a C-130. And this was very impressive. Two helicopters refueling at the same time. To the left, which you see there, is a 50 caliber machine gun. I assume we're over Somalia. I'm not really sure where we are. I thought we were going to do the refueling. These pictures were taken by Combat Camera, which is a photographer who's military, who's put on these missions, who takes photographs specifically for the military. And here we are again, and you can see the one aircraft coming up and they hook into the boom, and you have two aircraft together. It's really amazing. They refuel. I thought we were going to land and I was going to get off. Well, I guess not. So I said, why am I still here? And out came the 50 caliber machine guns, 2 of them. The bullets are like this. So they said to me, well, we've heard that you were a civilian helicopter nurse, and it's just great to have somebody medical on board that knows what to do. So we're going to keep you on the flight for the next 4 hours. And it was interesting. This is another interesting one. I want you to look at the flags. This is a hot mess, it appears. We were loading we work on cargo planes. This is a C-130. It's an Australian C-130, which we were never supposed to have to fly with the Aussies. But we loaded our equipment. It looks much nicer than this when we get everything settled in. We do that in flight when we're en route to pick up our patients. We're just bringing equipment on, tacking it down and strapping it down, and then we'll fix it up later. We were never supposed to fly with the Australians. We were not trained to fly with the Australians. We have kind of similar language. I don't know what checklist they're following. I have to do paperwork for them, and they do not have social security numbers. And all of my paperwork is based off social security numbers. So you work around that. Not a big deal. This is okay. This was just another day. You never, Forrest Gump. Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get, and that's exactly what being over there was like. This was their flag. Now, what I would like, we always flew flags on missions, and then we would annotate on them and put certificates with them, and we would give them to people. And when somebody says, well, this flag flew wherever, these flags actually flew on patient missions and combat areas. This was their own little flag. I want you to notice something about the crews. First of all, we'll talk a little bit about uniform. We don't wear weapons. Well, she has a shoulder holster. The rest of us had, attached to our web belt, and we had them attached to our thighs. I want you to look at the facial expressions on these people. I am over there. I am smiling. Sergeant Case is smiling. The gentleman in the back we never flew with before, but he was really good. He has a little bit of a smile. Now I want you to look at the woman with the glasses. Look at her face. She looks kind of numb. She had been to Baghdad twice. It was not pleasant either time. She was awarded a Bronze Star. She was just pulled out of Baghdad for the second time. They decided, well, maybe it was a little much. We're going to send her home. But the theory was at that time, and may still be, you don't just take somebody out of a war zone and you send them home. You kind of bring them back a little bit and see how they do. And if they're well enough, you can send them back in. This was not the place to send her. And I know her. I served with her. She was in my unit. Wonderful woman, nurse practitioner, but you could just see her face. She was done. This was before we went to pick up our patients. We picked up our patients. There were 8 of them. They were relatively stable. We were taken off 300 feet in the air, which is not that high off the ground. And you really don't have any room for error at 300 feet off the ground with a big plane. And then we heard a loud explosion. The plane rocked, it lit up. And I hear the pilot on headset saying, they got us, a missile just went off, it blew up 50 feet off the nose. We don't know if we have any damage. So we automatically, there's a whole process you go through and it's very, very quick. Unlike a civilian airline, you can't declare an emergency and say you're going to land. Someone just fired a rocket at you from right around that area. You need to get out of there and hope the plane continues to fly. So we did a little bit of this, and we had to go from 300 feet to 21,000 feet to get out of the range of those rockets. So we did. Puts a little stress on the wings. We didn't know if we knew the plane was flyable. We didn't know if we had taken any damage. So we radio into the center, it has to do with the secret clearance. And in that center, they have a whole lot of people, a whole lot of specialties who can basically, you know, okay, pilot, what's going on, co-pilot, what's going on, engineer, what's going on, navigator, what's going on, loading master, what's going on, you know, report your condition, MCD, tell me about your patients. They're all fine, just get us back on the ground. So they diverted us back into Al Udeid and we landed and we did fine. So that this is what the plane did. This is a different plane. It's a C-17, but we fire off chaff and flares, which is kind of stunning to see. It's basically pieces of plastic and aluminum and little pyrotechnics. What that does is, as you are leaving, you just have a pile of smoke behind you. So if someone is aiming something at you, they can't see you anymore because you've now disappeared into this smoke and this fire. If they're sending off missiles, the missiles kind of get a little confused because there's, you know, heat everywhere. So this is standard procedure for that. And we were doing this. And we are at the end, so you don't have to do this. Are we okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. I'd like you to notice the woman on the left is wearing makeup. And that's another big thing. People would make fun of us. Why are you wearing makeup? Why are you fixing your hair? Well, a couple of reasons. Number one, it makes a difference to my patients, men and women. If they're wounded and they've been in a war zone for months or a year or more, isn't it nice to have somebody that reminds you of home? Yeah, I'm a little older and was, so it's like, oh, you remind me of my mother. Oh, you remind me of my older sister. And just for a second, they're transported somewhere else in their mind and it takes their mind off the horror they have just been through. And even just working with other men, that will occur. And then people would say, well, I don't, and other women would say, I don't understand why you're doing that. Well, you know what? If I'm going to combat zone and you're going to shoot me or you're going to blow me up, I want to look good when I go or at my best. And that was a theory a lot of women had. You would hear them talk about that. The woman on the right is a reservist, a mother, early in the deployment, and this is her coming home to her child. And that is all I have to say. If anyone has any questions about anything. Oh, you're welcome. And to everybody. And this isn't me. This is, I represent a group of people. I did nothing special. Yes.
Were you graduated from a accredited nursing school?
Yes, Pace University. Pace University. And actually I snuck in because I had a BS in science with a major in nursing. All of our science courses were pre-med. They didn't teach down to nurses.
Good.
Yeah, but that was it. Yes, ma'am.
Why did you decide to enlist in the first place? What did that mean?
Actually, it's a funny story. I was in my 30s. A friend of mine went to enlist. She didn't, I did. What happened was when I was in high school, I had a friend who, he was my best friend. He was a year older. He was a year ahead of me. His parents were divorced, blah, 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 blah. His father always said he was disappointed in him. So he joined the Marines and he went to Vietnam. And he was killed in action September 17th, 1969. He was my best friend. And I had been a nurse for a long time at that point, and I felt, you know what? Let me go into the service. I think I can do this, and let me help somebody else's best friend. And I made it a point to talk to Vietnam veterans who were wounded and moved out, you know, airevac'd out or whatever. And I would sit down and talk to them. What made a difference to you when you were wounded and with the people that took care of you? What did they do that made you feel better or special that I might not think of? I was told certain things and I was actually able to translate that into real world and do that for, I remember a Navy SEAL once. I got him to, he was wounded, he got shot in the chest, he had chest tubes. He was supposed to be staying on the stretcher, and one of my Vietnam veterans told me, he was in a similar position. He said, I wanted to walk off that plane. When my people were there to welcome me home, it was important to be able to stand up and walk off that plane. So I said to this, he was not supposed to be getting up, but he could. I made that judgment. He was good enough to do that. And I went to the SEAL and I said, you think you can walk? He goes, you really let me walk off the plane? And just little things made such a difference. So yeah, it was because I wanted to help people like my friend. He was always there for me and I felt I wasn't there for him when he died. Yes.
You mentioned before that you weren't covered under the Geneva Convention. And I was just curious, does that mean that someone who was part of the French resistance in World War II or part of the resistance now in Ukraine, a civilian, if they're captured, are they covered under the Geneva Convention, best to your knowledge?
Quite frankly, I don't know. And the Geneva Convention is almost like a living document, which is why it has the S on the end. It continues to change. I only know about my portion of it, and we did not meet the criteria. I'm really not sure about that.
Non-military people are not covered under the.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's true. Okay. And, you know, we always said, well, you know, who follows the Geneva Convention? People do, I think. And when you look at Jessica Lynch, initially by the people that captured her, they treated her horribly and did horrible things to her. However, when you read her story about what happened when she got to the hospital, they were incredibly kind to her. And they devoted a lot of time and attention to see that she got well. And no one wanted her to go back to the Americans more than the people in that hospital. One nurse would hold her and hug her and sing her lullabies at night. This is according to Jessica Lynch. They would put her in a window when they thought they were Americans who were recon Marines coming around trying to find her. So they would see her and take her. And that was for a couple of reasons. Number one, they really cared about her. She was an injured person, period. Number two, they were in the middle of a war. Their community was being bombed, their people and their neighbors were being killed. This woman was taking up a lot of resources and a lot of time. And they were afraid the US military was going to come in, overrun that hospital and kill everybody. So it was, please take her back, take her back. They were happy to see her go. And a lot of it was about her capture, her rescue. And fortunately, all those men who went in to get her out, they met zero resistance. But God bless them, they went in to get her out and they didn't care. They would have done whatever they had to do to rescue her. Yes.
I think you referred to a person, a master, a flight nurse as master surgeon. But I thought all military nurses.
Military nurses are enlisted that serve as flight medics in the Air Force, are National Registry EMTs. In the Army, they were licensed practical nurses. So I'm sorry, I don't know who I referred to, but that was in error. The nurses were officers. You're correct.
Not all officers. Nurses.
nurses are, if they have their BSN, they are. If they go in, when I wanted to originally join in 88, I looked at the Navy. I only had an associate's degree at that point, and they told me, you can come in, but we're going to make you enlisted. We're not going to make you an officer. And at that time, I could have did get into the Army with associates, and that quickly changed. When I transitioned to the Air Force, I had to resign my commission in the Army, and the same day, get commissioned into the Air Force, but I had to have my BSN. You also negotiate your rank when you do that. They can bust you down or whatever. It's a negotiation. And my negotiation was, I come in as is. You're not taking anything away from me. You need me. I came from the Army. I have field experience, and that's where you're headed. So you need my expertise. So, and I kept my rank. Other people did not.
Easy transition.
No. The whole culture was different. The Air Force was so much more relaxed, call everybody by their first name. I was stationed at places like Fort Benning, Georgia with the infantry. I was there for 5 months. My reserve unit was, we were in support of West Point. Nothing gets more formal than that. So when I went into the Air Force and it's like, hey, Joe, what you doing? And women are wearing earrings and their battle dress uniform. I'm like, what in the world is this? So they also appreciated the fact that I came in and started, there were a few of us came in from the Army. We were recruited into the Air Force. They wanted to see a little bit of a cultural change, and they were going from airplanes into tents and hotels into tents. Their whole culture was about to change, and we helped them with that transition. But that was difficult. It really was. It was very different.
Diane, what did you mean by invisible veterans?
Okay, thank you. Women are not seen as veterans. I was in for 24 years. I have an ID card. I go somewhere and there's a veterans discount or there's something special for veterans, or I go to the dentist and I say, here's my card. And they say, no, I need your husband's information, not yours. Air Force Base. I went to change some paperwork in 2017. The young man at the desk, I handed him my ID, and I'm in civilian, I'm an old lady in civilian clothes. And he goes, no, he's got my ID. No, ma'am, I need to see your sponsor. I said, I am the sponsor. I need to see the member. I am the member. No, ma'am, let me explain to you. I said, you don't explain anything to me. And I went into Lieutenant Colonel mode and jacked that kid up. And we had a little conversation. Oh yeah. And there was an E7 sitting next to him who I had spoken to the day before. And it clicked to him what was happening. Because I had called, I said, what paperwork do I need? What documentation do I need? And I got everything together. And here I have this young man telling me, no, ma'am, blah, blah, blah. I'd like to do a little shock and awe. So I very politely explained to him some anatomical differences, and I don't have to be this to be an officer. And if you look on the computer screen, the person that served those 24 years and served in Iraq and got an Air Medal and was awarded an Air Medal, blah, 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 that was me. But people don't see women as veterans. And part of that, I think, is because when you see these advertisements on television for certain charitable organizations, up until recently, it was all men. Only men got their arms blown off. Only men had this happen to them. And that's, you were conditioned to see that. Women don't serve in combat. Women didn't serve in combat until 2016. So a veteran, really? No. It happens all the time. And any of the veterans in the community, the females, you talk to them, they will tell you story after story. It is assumed it is your husband. I will say things like, I don't own one of those, but it gets their attention. So there was a book written called Invisible Veteran, and it's all about that. But now those organizations are starting to change, and they're starting to show women.
My sister was in the Air Force, and I always considered she was a veteran.
Mm-hmm. She is. She is, but my point is people do not recognize women as veterans usually. We are veterans.
Definitely.
But, you know, a lot of people will say, oh, you were in the military? Yeah, I was. They find it hard. They're used to, especially in our culture in the United States, it's all men.
Years ago, the Air Force for women was terrible. I mean, you had to keep your weight at a certain.
Oh, we still do.
If you went over that weight.
Oh, yeah.
You got kicked out.
Oh, yeah.
You got a traffic ticket. You got a ticket.
Enlist, yeah, there are issues with that too.
They were bad.
No, that never changed. That never changed. Yes.
I don't know how much you ever put up with it.
You were saying at the beginning that you thought it was good that they don't keep separate statistics for women and men now.
Mhm.
And I get your reason,
Mhm.
because we're all in it together. On the other hand, on the flip side, maybe this issue around women being invisible as veterans wouldn't be so invisible if people knew that, 100 women among these veterans died, if that information is available.
Yeah, and I do agree with you on that level, and part of that's why I did what I did here, trying to point that out. But I think the biggest thing is these advertisements, and I won't mention the organizations, but once people start to see that, they will understand that more. But yeah, maybe we do need a little more of that at this point. But again, we're looking to get away from that as being a separate group. We want to be soldiers, period. We're all the same.
Diane, when you were on active duty in Qatar, an Arab country,
Mhm.
how did you dress off duty when you visited local marketplace?
Very good question. You had to wear your hair down. I'm not sure why, but you did. Someone got attacked for wearing her hair up. You had to be fully covered. It didn't matter if it was 130 degrees. You wore a long sleeve blouse. For a female long sleeve blouse, I wore a jacket, jeans, everything was loose fitting, and you were totally covered. You were not required to cover your hair. You were not required to wear a facial covering. When I first went in for Desert Storm, they told me I had to dye my hair brown. I said that wasn't happening. And that was not
When
an
you're
issue.
in an Arab country, you
Mhm.
conform to their tradition.
Yeah, especially when you're off the
Because
base.
there's a status of forces agreement.
Yes. That's it,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Anita, you had a question?
I just think it's remarkable the amount of emotion that's still in your voice.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can tell what you went through emotionally.
Well, in doing this presentation and for the one over there, yeah, there were certain slides here that the one of the woman from Vietnam, that nurse, the first 5 times I looked at that, I cried. It took me a long time to rehearse this and get over that. The one about Mosul, I wasn't sure. I get very upset about that because I knew those people and it had such an impact on all of us, and I was there for that. So yes. And I also found I have a good thing going on, though. When I tried to recall certain horrific instances, I can't. And that's good. I recall the beginning. I can't recall the middle, and I can recall bits and pieces. I also had a recurring dream about these Al-Qaeda guys being in the back of this pickup truck coming up my street in Steventown. I had no idea where that came from. Going through these slides, didn't I find a picture of that? Not in Steventown, but I did find that picture. So I was involved in that somehow, somewhere, and I don't remember it, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Rather than reliving it. But yeah, thank you actually for noticing that.
It's longer for firefighters to recognize women in firefighting than it took the military.
Oh, really? Okay. What you do?
Sorry,
No.
was your transition like after got out of the military? How did you find adjusting?
I was in Steventown, so that was interesting. It wasn't bad. And part of the reason I moved to Steventown is I wanted to be away from everybody, everything. Nobody in town knew me. I hid under a rock for the first several years. I was done. Between that and my civilian job, which was flying on a helicopter down in Westchester, you're going to mass casualties, you're going to explosions. We did 1,000 calls a month. Those two things combined kind of drain on you after a while. So that's why it took me a while to find you guys.
How many years were you in?
24. And that was while having a full-time job. That's hard to do. And in the Air Force, to be a flight nurse, you have to maintain the exact same standard as the active duty people do, and that's virtually impossible. So I quit my job early, took a very early retirement, got a partial retirement in 2004, and stayed still as a reservist, but spent a lot more time up until, actually it was the end of December 2011. Yes.
When you were married, where was your husband and how did you communicate with people back home? Did you write?
Yeah, that changed over the years with tech.
Radio communication?
That was interesting. When I was in Al Udeid, I wasn't married at the time, but I had a significant other. We would have to walk 1.8 miles through the desert to get to a phone that we could use 3 times a week.
To call back home.
Yeah. Although being flight nurse, we had little ins here and there, so we made additional calls.
Did they communicate with satellite or was there a receiving station in the West Coast?
I have no idea. All I know is I picked up the phone and made a phone call.
Was Stars and Stripes published at the time?
Yes, it was.
Right, good.
Yeah, they were moving that on the plane as well as we were with patients. Anything else? Okay.
How much did something like the fact that you couldn't get uniforms that were a proper size and all that sort of gets you after a while?
It was-
Like, I'm sacrificing this and I can't even get it.
Yeah, you can't even dress me right. It was that wasn't so much of an issue as it was the way you were treated. When you're a female and you're 5'3", 5'4", which many women in the military are, men tend to like to try and intimidate you. They think it's fun, or they try and make you cry. And I thought that was just me, but reading these books, oh, it happens to all women. I had an incident at the airborne school where I had some drill sergeants. I was over there just to see, they had a family day and you could go over and you could jump off the tower and I did all this stuff. It was fun. I just wanted to see what they were going through because some of these people were my patients in the hospital. So I walk by these group of drill sergeants and I hear one say, watch this. And I'm like, oh, here we go. So this drill sergeant comes up to me, hands on hips, gets in my face, starts screaming in my face, if you're in my school, I'd have you, blah, 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 blah. Now, I did not want to embarrass him in front of his other drill sergeants. So they were kind of far enough away that they couldn't hear. I stepped into him and I looked up at him. I said, smile. And he did. And I said, understand something. I am not in your school. I am not your student. I am a second lieutenant in the United States Army. You are a sergeant. I outrank you. How dare you talk to me that way? I said, here's what's going to happen. I'm not going to say anything to embarrass you in front of your friends. I'm going to take a step back. You're going to take a step back. You are going to render me the proper salute. Then you are going to do an about face and walk away. Got it? And he said, yes, ma'am. And that's what happened. I ran into him a few weeks later. And he said, ma'am, don't you want to join my airborne school? I said, what? So you can throw me out without a parachute? No, that's not happening. But you ran into that a lot. And you would just stand there and
When
go,
your rank was.
oh, yeah,
visible.
you're a small woman. Hey, I am physically intimidating you. And they want to see a woman cry. I've never seen a woman cry in uniform ever in the military, ever. But they will try. So, you just stand off and look in the distance. I had one man approach me in a major, and I was a major. It was in Ramstein. We weren't supposed to have weapons, but we were technically on the flight line. We were going back into Iraq. We needed our weapons. So I'm with men who have weapons. So this major who works in an office comes and steps right in front of me, and he says, I hope there's not a weapon in that holster. And I was tired and cranky. And I said, not only is there a weapon in that holster, but there is a magazine in and a round chamber. Do you have any other stupid questions you want to ask me? And he just kind of looked and walked. But that's how you have to deal with it. You have to be able to stand. I had quite the reputation for doing that, and I got picked for special assignments because of that. I would also refuse orders on very rare occasions if I knew I was correct and I thought that person was going to hurt one of my wounded soldiers. That was not going to happen. I don't care how big you are, what your rank is, not going to happen. And we can push that up the line all the way you want. And I never got in trouble for it, never got reprimanded. What was that, Mr. Rick? But I go into Lieutenant Colonel mode.
You played Lieutenant Colonel with Lieutenant Colonel.
I did? No, I wouldn't dare do that with Rick.
Why not?
I haven't played the sergeant with her yet.
Yeah, watch out.
Yeah, don't feel bad. Sergeants used to do that with privates. It didn't make any difference whether it was male or female.
Oh, okay. So I'm not special. I get it. Okay.
Oh, yeah, you're special.
Oh, okay.
Diane, if you had it to do all over again, would you do it?
Absolutely. I loved every minute of it. I mean, they were terrible moments, but I loved every minute of it. And it's horrible because you talk to friends, it's people you meet at the, at the veterans events that we have. And, what was your time like? I had a blast. I loved it. It's like, you took care of wounded soldiers in combat. How could you love it?
You're a true soldier. Yes.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That comes
Thank
first.
you again.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Okay, I survived. And my sisters watched. At least two of them. Let me just- Recording. My computer didn't die in the middle, and I'm surprised.
What brought you to Town aside from trying to get away from all these sort of extreme experiences and get a break from it?
Well, I had friends down in Westchester and further south. I had friends in Worcester and, around the Boston area. This was kind of right in between. And it was quiet, it was beautiful.
It's rural.
Yeah,
We don't have the problems of New York City.
no, and that's where I was born and raised. So, yeah.
Someone got pushed into the subway today.
Again? Oh, Jesus. But yeah, this was the perfect place to go and hide under a rock for a few years, actually, several years. I gradually came out.
Are those your children?
Yeah. Bye, Linda. Bye, Paulette.
You want the chairs in place?
If you want to just stack them right over there, that would be great. And I'm just going to end the meeting.